we can call this cluster or this region a neighborhood of Z0, right? So think about it like your normal communities you have around you. And then, for instance, you have your nuclear family and it's a cluster around you. And then your house is in a particular street to which that street forms a cluster around your house. You call that a neighborhood, correct? Right? And then you have people within that street to which you are familiar with and they form a cluster around you as well, which means that your definition or your instances of the neighborhood is dependent on how large you want the cluster to be. Now, in this case, for instance, if we set that the distance between Z0 and the maximum possible stretched point in this cluster is, for instance, the radius epsilon, then in this case, we can say we have represented an epsilon neighborhood of Z0, which means epsilon remains the maximum possible distance any of those points could travel away from Z0, right? That's your absolute distance. However, within this cluster, you would have some points. Let's say there's a point here, let's say Z1, such that the distance between Z1 and Z0 will be completely less than epsilon because Z1 is not at the farthest possible distance, right? I give you an example. For instance, let's say you have yourself an extended family such that the head of the family, the current head of the family is your grandfather. Now, you as a grandkid to your grandfather would represent the maximum possible distance within that cluster. However, within your father and your grandfather, the distance between them is shortened, right? Because your grandfather gave birth to your father, right? So the distance between them is shortened compared to you that you were given birth to by your father, who was given birth to by your grandfather, which makes the distance longer. That's exactly what's going on here. So you have a point that's at the farthest distance away from Z0, such that the distance between them is epsilon, that's your radius. And then you have a point, a random point that does not cover that same distance, that is within that cluster as well, right? So in this case, you could define and say that the absolute distance between that point Z1 and Z0, right, will definitely be less than epsilon.